My name is Isaiah Banks. I was 38 years old the morning I signed those divorce papers, and I was smiling. Not a grin. Not the kind of smile that asks to be explained. Just the quiet steadiness a man carries when something costly and necessary is finally formally finished. An attorney, a woman named Sandra Forrest who wore her confidence like a garment she'd had tailored, looked at me the way people look at someone who hasn't understood the gravity of what's happening. Gabrielle looked at me from across the conference table, and her eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, just with the focused attention of a woman who had spent 11 months arranging an outcome and was trying to understand why the person sitting across from her wasn't more visibly diminished by it. My attorney, Diane, did not look at me at all. She was reviewing the signature page. She already knew. They had fought for 11 months. They had the house in East Nashville, the Craftsman on Russell Street, that I had refinished the floors of over 2 weekends, and that Gabrielle had always called her house even when we were happy. They had the joint investment account, $87,000. They had 24 months of alimony. They had gotten everything they asked for. They did not know about the acquisition. 8 days before I pressed pen to that signature line, a company out of Louisville called Meridian Infrastructure Group had wired $2.4 million to Bank Systems Holding, LLC, a single-member entity I had incorporated 3 years before Gabrielle and I ever met. Her attorney had the LLC name. It had been disclosed on the asset statement. What she had never requested in 11 months of discovery was a current independent valuation of it as a going concern. She had never asked the right question. I signed. I smiled. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. I grew up watching my father do electrical work, not as a trade at first, as a competence, the kind that meant our lights stayed on when the neighbors didn't. And that taught me early to see a wall differently than most people do. Not as a surface, as a system. Something running through it, going somewhere, connected to something else, capable of real damage if you pull the wrong wire at the wrong time and in the wrong sequence. I got my license at 23. I ran someone else's crew for 3 years before I started my own. Banks Electrical and Systems had been operating out of a leased bay in Antioch for 8 years by the time the divorce was filed. 22 employees, 3 service vehicles, a growing contract base in commercial and multifamily construction across Middle Tennessee. To Gabrielle, and most of the people she socialized with, this looked like a working man with a work truck and a trade. It was accurate as far as it went. My mother, Adeline, had told me once, sitting at her kitchen table in South Nashville when I was still in high school, and certain I understood how people worked. Baby, the most dangerous thing a person can do is look at what a man does and think they understand what he has built. She had meant it about a coach who had underestimated one of my teammates. She had meant it about everything. She was 72 now, still in the house where she had raised me, still tending the garden she had kept for 30 years. He had met Gabrielle 7 years ago at a benefit dinner in the Gulch, the kind of event where the tickets cost $300 and the room was full of people who wanted to be seen at the kind of event where tickets cost $300. She worked in corporate communications for a healthcare company, poised, quick, the kind of woman who could move through a room with the efficiency of someone who had always known exactly how to make herself worth speaking to. He had watched her for an hour before she noticed me. She had been surprised, I think, that I was interesting. I had thought that was something we would grow past together. We married 2 years later. The first 3 years were good ones. She came to job sites twice and asked real questions about how the systems worked. And I believed for a while that she could see what I saw when I looked at the walls. The house on Russell Street had been a project we undertook together, stripping decades of paint off the woodwork on weekends, refinishing floors on our hands and knees. She had an eye for the finishing. I was better with the structure. I had incorporated Bank Systems Holding, LLC, before we married, the recommendation of my accountant, who wanted a clean wall between my personal assets and the operating company's liability exposure. It held my ownership stake in the business. Gabrielle knew it existed in the same way she knew what tools I kept in my work truck. She had seen the name on a document once, and she had never asked what it meant. The signs came the way they always come, incrementally and then undeniably. A phone face down on the counter when I walked into a room which it had not been before. A laugh behind a closed door that belonged to a conversation I was not part of. A schedule that filled up in ways that stopped accounting for itself. My mother was the one who put language to what I had been noticing, but not yet naming. The way she had always been the one to say out loud what I was still watching. She called me on a Thursday morning from South Nashville and said she had seen something I needed to know and that I should come by when the day was done. I got there at 6 o'clock. My mother had seen Gabriel 2 weeks before she called, at a restaurant in Hillsborough Village, at a table near the window, with a man Adeline did not recognize. She had sat with it for 14 days before picking up the phone. It was comfortable with her, she said. Not new comfortable, the kind that comes from time. She folded her hands on the table in front of her. His hand was on the table. So was hers. I stayed long enough to be certain. I thanked her. I drove home. I did not ask Gabriel about it. He ate the dinner she had made, washed the dishes, and went to bed at 10. I lay in the dark and thought about the things I had been noticing, but had not yet cataloged. My hands did not shake. He started where I always started, with a system I didn't understand. The documentation. The actual record of what had been moving through the walls all along, waiting to be read correctly. He pulled 3 years of joint bank statements on a Friday evening while Gabrielle was at dinner with friends. What emerged, sorted by date and amount, was a pattern of cash withdrawals. Consistent, averaging $600, always on Fridays. 31 of them over 26 months. A total of $18,600,000, drawn from our joint account in amounts small enough to scroll past without seeing what they formed when you laid them end to end. He had built wiring systems my whole working life. I knew what a pattern looked like when you stepped back from the individual connection and looked at where the current was actually going. He went to the shared calendar next. I compared the withdrawal dates against entries marked as conference calls, working late, or simply left blank. Of 31 withdrawals, 24 hours of a schedule gap, he built a spreadsheet, date, amount, what she had told me, and I labeled the fourth column where I noted what the location data on the shared app showed, simply, actual. He moved with the same deliberate calm I brought to every diagnostic job. The man's name was Dwayne Pierce. He was not difficult to find. His name appeared in Gabrielle's contacts when she left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. One Sunday afternoon, she had gone to the other room for 40 seconds, and I was 3 feet away. He did not read her messages. I saw the name. I noted it. That evening, on my own laptop, I looked up Dwayne Pierce, corporate attorney at a firm on Church Street in downtown Nashville. Silver Mercedes, season tickets to the Predators, which I knew specifically because we had attended a game the previous February as a couple and run into him in the concourse. Gabriel had introduced us. He had shaken my hand with the careful precision of a man managing the specific difficulty of meeting someone whose wife he had been spending Friday evenings with. He had thought at the time that he seemed nervous to meet me. I now understood why. He forwarded the bank statements to my personal email. I saved the spreadsheet. I took screenshots of the calendar entries alongside the location log. He created a folder on my personal laptop and named it Due Diligence, the same phrase I used for every file that was about understanding the real value of something before committing to a decision. My face remained perfectly calm. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to Diane. The second was to my business partner, Victor. Wo had been fielding acquisition inquiries from Meridian Infrastructure for 8 months, and who needed to know I was ready to take those conversations seriously now. There was a reason I had been letting them sit. There was a reason I had not been in any hurry. There wasn't a reason anymore. Set the meeting, I told Victor. Tell them I'm available next week. Deanne had been practicing family law in Nashville for 17 years, and she had the specific quality I had recognized immediately. She did not speak to fill space. She spoke when she had something to say, and what she said tended to be exactly what the situation required and nothing beyond it. He laid out the complete picture at her conference table on a Wednesday morning. The withdrawal pattern, the calendar correlation, the Pierce background, the asset summary. She reviewed everything without expression. When I finished, she closed the last document and looked at me. "What do you want out of this?" she asked. "A clean exit," I said. "The business intact, the retirement accounts, the lake property in Dixon County." I paused. "She can have the Russell Street house, the joint investment account, and a reasonable alimony term. I'll make it easy for her to get what she wants." Diane looked at me for a moment. You're not fighting for the house. No. Why not? Because the house isn't what I built. She made a note. She understood. Real power operated in quiet rooms, and in the distance between what people decided was worth fighting for and what was actually there. My mother received me that Saturday at her kitchen table with coffee already made, and the expression of a woman who had been holding herself together for 2 weeks and was glad to have someone to hold herself together with. I told her what I knew, what I was doing, and that she did not need to worry. She looked at her cup. I never trusted that woman's interest in you, she said quietly. Not her fault, maybe. Some people can't see what isn't finished yet. They need it completed before they can put a number on it. She looked up at me. You've always been in the middle of building something. She never had the patience to wait and see what it became. She put her hand on mine for a moment. You finish what you start. That's all I ever needed to know about you. I drove home and got back to work. Dianes Paralegal spent 3 days pulling background on Dwayne Pierce, standard pre-litigation due diligence, the kind of research that took 3 days because it was being done thoroughly. What she found was this. Pierce had finalized his own divorce 18 months prior. His ex-wife's attorney had filed a motion during those proceedings alleging the dissipation of joint assets through a pattern of undisclosed cash expenditures over a 22-month period. The motion had been contested. It had been settled in mediation, with terms that remained confidential. Pierce had kept his Green Hills condo and his Church Street practice. His ex-wife had kept a substantially reduced share of what she had entered the marriage with. It had, in other words, done something close to this before. I read Diane's summary and placed it in the due diligence folder alongside everything else. None of it was going to be used in the proceedings. I was not contesting the divorce. I was not filing counterclaims. I was accepting the terms Gabrielle's team had spent 11 months designing, signing my name, and walking out. The Pierce background was documentation. It was the record of what the situation actually was, kept in a place where it could be found if it was ever needed. Some documentation was like that. You kept it because you were an electrician, and electricians kept records of every system they touched. Because the day always came when somebody needed to know what was running through the walls. The Meridian conversations had been running for 8 months. Quiet, methodical, the kind of acquisition dialogue that moves the way sound contracts move. Slowly, with each party understanding exactly what they are committing to before anything gets signed. Meridian wanted to expand their service footprint across the Southeast. Banks Electrical had the contracts, the crew, the operational history, and, as Victor always pointed out in these conversations, the reputation. 8 years. No comercial contract lost to a callback failure. No structural defensive cited on a final inspection. That kind of record was worth more than the equipment on the lot. The negotiation had a number on it. That number had moved from an opening conversation to a letter of intent to a closing timeline. Diane had been aware from the moment I told her. She had reviewed the LLC structure, confirmed the premarital establishment date, confirmed that no marital funds had ever been contributed to Banks Systems Holding. Ed advice, delivered without drama, finalized the acquisition before the divorce settlement was signed. The LLC was disclosed on the asset statement. What the other side chose to do with that disclosure was their strategic problem. They had chosen to accept the valuation their own assessor produced, a firm that had looked at equipment lists and outstanding contracts and arrived at $143,000. They had never engaged an M&A specialist. They had never asked for a going concern appraisal. They had spent 11 months fighting for the house and the furniture and the vacation account. The acquisition closed on a Thursday afternoon. The wired funds arrived at Banks Systems Holding by 4 o'clock. I signed the divorce papers the following Friday morning. He went home Thursday night and made dinner, chicken, rice, something simple. Ann watched 2 innings of a baseball game and went to bed at 10. I had spent 11 months inside a process that had required patience and precision and the specific discipline of not acting. Before the time was right. That discipline had not cost me anything. It had, in the end, been the work. The conference room was on the 11th floor of a building in Midtown, Nashville. Glass walls, a city view meant to communicate something about the firm's standing. Sandra Forrest had chosen the venue. It was her building. Gabrielle arrived in a charcoal pantsuit and the settled confidence of a woman who had spent 11 months preparing for a moment she believed was entirely in her favor. She sat down without looking at me directly, adjusted her legal pad, and folded her hands. Forrest walked through the settlement terms with the efficiency of a professional presenting work she was proud of. The Russell Street property in full, the joint investment account transferred, 24 months of alimony at the agreed figure. All of it accepted. All of it ready for signature. Deanna reviewed each page without urgency. She made 2 marginal notes. She initialed where indicated. Then I saw it. The same thing I had watched for my whole career before I opened a panel I hadn't worked before. The small hesitation. The fraction of a second where something didn't match the schematic. Forrest had stopped on the asset disclosure summary. She was looking at the line that read, Banks Systems Holding, LLC, single member, premarital, sole ownership. She had looked at it before. She was looking at it differently now. Miss Holbrook, she said to Diane, regarding this holding company, can you confirm its current asset value reflects the figure on the disclosure? Diane looked up. The disclosure reflects the valuation provided to your firm in response to your discovery request, she said. Has your client's team produced a counter-valuation? No, Forrest said. I want to confirm the disclosure is accurate as filed, Diane said evenly. Is there a specific line item in question? Forrest looked at the document. The calculation was happening behind her eyes, the particular speed of a professional who has just identified a door she may not have opened. She looked at me. I looked back at her. I was not smiling yet. I was still. I'd like to request a brief recess, Forrest said. Both parties are present and prepared, Diane said. The settlement terms have been agreed to and documented. My client is ready to proceed. Forrest looked at Gabrielle. Gabrielle looked at me. She had been waiting for something from me all morning. An objection, a renegotiation, some evidence that this was costing me what she had intended it to cost. She had not gotten any of that. She gave Forrest a small, firm nod. I signed. Diane signed as witness. The notary stamped. Forrest's pen hesitated for a half second before she countersigned. The hesitation of a professional who has just felt the floor shift slightly and is deciding whether there is anything left to say about it. There wasn't. Gabrielle initialed the final page with the satisfaction of someone accepting delivery of something she believed she had earned. She did not look up. He looked around the room once, at the glass wall, at the city below, at the notary stacking her copies, at Diane closing her portfolio with the quiet click of a job finished correctly. I picked up my pen from the table. I stood. I hope you get everything you're looking for, I said. I said it to the room. I meant it entirely. It was the truth. I walked out. In the elevator going down, I thought about the crew in Brentwood, who were starting a rough end that afternoon. I thought about Victor's flight to Louisville next week for the transition meetings with Meridian's operations team. I thought about my mother's persimmon tree in South Nashville, the one she had planted 3 years ago that had finally started bearing fruit this fall. I thought about the fact that she had planted it without knowing when it would produce, only knowing that it would. My phone rang in the parking garage. Gabrielle's name on the screen. He looked at it through 4 rings. The garage was quiet and concrete and smelled like cold air. I knew what the call was. They had done the records check that should have happened 11 months ago. They had found the acquisition filing. They were going to want to know what it meant. I knew exactly what it meant. I had known for 8 days. I let it go to voicemail. He got in my truck. I pulled out into the Nashville afternoon, into the particular low light of a Friday in October. I had built something. It was still mine. 3 months had passed, like a long clean run of conduit. Direct, purposeful, no wasted footage. The transition to Meridian had gone the way these things go when the documentation is sound and the people are professional. On schedule, without drama, in the sequence we had agreed to. He had stayed on as a senior operations consultant for the 18-month handoff period Meridian had requested, a condition I had negotiated, and that paid a monthly retainer on top of the acquisition price. Victor had taken a director-level position within the new structure. Most of the crew had stayed. The work coming out of that bay in Antioch was the same quality it had always been. The name above the door had changed. The hands doing the work had not. I was building something smaller and more deliberate now, an electrical consulting practice, just myself and 2 people I trusted, focused on project oversight and systems design rather than installation. The architectural side of the work. I had always known I was heading here. He had needed the right moment to turn in that direction. Her name was Camille Trotter. She was a licensed general contractor who ran her own residential renovation firm in East Nashville. The kind of work that meant she showed up to job sites in boots and knew the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition without needing to ask anyone. My mother had arranged the introduction at her neighbor's cookout in September, which was how my mother arranged most of the things she wanted to arrange. We had talked for 2 hours about the difference between historic renovation standards in Tennessee and Georgia. I had driven home thinking she was the most directly interesting person I had spoken to in a long time. He had heard about Gabrielle's attempts through channels that information moves through in a city of Nashville's size. New counsel had been retained to challenge the settlement, arguing the acquisition proceeds should have been treated as a current marital asset rather than separate property. The argument had a shape to it. The timing did not. The settlement was signed, notarized, and filed. The LLAC had been disclosed. The failure to seek a going concern valuation had been a strategic choice made by her team during 11 months of discovery. The challenge did not proceed. She remained in the Russell Street house. The alimony payments arrived on the first of each month, automatically, precisely on time. I held no bitterness. None at all. Bitterness required ongoing investment in people who had stopped deserving the interest. And I had never been good at that kind of waste. He was sitting on the back porch of my rental in Germantown on a Sunday morning in November when Camille came out with 2 mugs and sat beside me without ceremony. The yard was overgrown and unworked and full of possibility that hadn't been touched yet. I had been thinking about it since I moved in. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm planning," I said. She looked at the yard the way she looked at every project, with the practical attention of someone who could see what a thing was going to be before any work started. "What are you building?" He looked at it too. The yard, the morning, the particular quality of November light that made everything look like it was waiting. "Something right," I said. "This time, from the beginning." She nodded. She drank her coffee. I was free. I was liquid. I was ready. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.